We're going to call the December 12th meeting of the Offshore Wind Advisory Committee to order. We'll start today with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so this is the second monthly meeting for the Offshore Wind Advisory Committee. We had our first meeting last month, and we're looking to obviously bring in individuals to address the offshore wind projects that are offshore here in Westport, and that could do onshore cabling here in Westport. So tonight we have members from the Massachusetts, both Department of Energy and Executive Office of Energy, which will be giving us a brief presentation. The committee members will most likely have questions concerning that, and then we'll just see if we can open it up to the public as well. Since this is a much larger crowd than our first meeting, I think what we should do is at least go around the table, do some quick introductions, so everyone knows who's around the table, and their position as to why they are appointed to this committee. So we'll start, Maury, if you'd want to get started.
Yeah, the name is Maury May, and I represent the town's Economic Development Task Force. And my interest here is to make sure that if indeed we were to have a cable come on shore, that the town would have a host community agreement, some kind of pilot payment of lieu of taxes that would compensate us for the trouble we'd have to go through. I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but I am saying that if we are forced to have it, then we should make sure we get paid.
My name is Christopher Thrasher, and I am on here as an at-large member of the committee.
Hi, I'm Shauna Tees. I'm chair of the select board, so I'm the select board representative to the committee.
I'm Constance Ski. I'm a representative for Protect Our Westport Waters, POWW.
I'm Jake McGuigan. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission and appointed to Offshore Wind Advisory Committee.
Good evening. My name is Rick Smith. I represent the Shellfish Advisory Board, and my interest is to represent the shellfishes that make their livelihood on the river. That's for me. I'm not here.
That's a good signal for all of us, I guess, to do the same. My name's John Bullard, and I am a representative of the Planning Board on this committee.
Thanks, John. We only have one real issue prior to any presentations from the state. The first on our agenda is we, in the first meeting, had a charter. We made some amendments to that charter, so that had to go back before the select board, and I think Shauna might have an update as to how that went.
Yeah, so the select board approved it as suggested, so they accepted the recommendations and adopted it.
And anyone that wants to see that, we will probably have that available. And then also, we went through the charter in our first meeting, which that is also videotaped and recorded, so you can go back and look at that as well. Essentially, just the charter is explaining what our role is as an offshore advisory committee, where we go in our role with the, basically giving advice to the select board and others if a project does come forward here in Westport. So without further ado, I don't want to keep our friends from the state who had to travel all the way down here. I know that's not an easy commute. I just asked Senator Rodericks. And I would actually like to thank Senator Rodericks. He was instrumental in working with our participants tonight from the state to have them come down here and present to us where the state is, what the state's role in a lot of these projects are. There's a lot of, or let's say a lack of information out there, and that's why this committee has been founded to hopefully educate the public, educate ourselves as to the ongoing projects. I'm sure many of you have seen the ones going up already from the shoreline. So I know there are some concerns, and we want to, there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So we want to make sure that at least if there is a healthy public debate, that it's being debated amongst appropriate information and really where this is going here in town. So again, I'd like to probably bring up JB. You can start with your presentation. And what we'll probably do is, obviously, we'll open it up for the committee members to ask questions. We'll let everyone present from the state first, and then we'll have questions based upon, what they present and kind of some things that are percolating here on the committee.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just so everyone knows, my name is Johannes Buchanan. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Government Relations at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs.
You should come up to.
Yeah,
Do you want me to come up there?
yeah, and you can use that microphone. It'll come up over here. Are you going to use your presentation right now, or?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so let's do it right from there then.
And, I did not get his name other than JD.
Can you make
Sure.
sure you speak where everybody can?
Sure. So my name is Johannes Buchanan, JB. I'm an assistant. How about now? I'm an Assistant Secretary for Government Relations at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. We do both the energy and the environmental affairs, obviously. So we do energy, which is the DPU, the Department of Energy Resources, the Energy Facilities Siting Board, and we also do the environment side, so the Department of Environmental Protection, Coastal Zone Management, the Department of Fish and Game,
Can everybody hear okay?
DCR.
No,
No?
Here, you gotta,
Can you hear me now?
please
yeah.
speak louder.
Project.
So we are here today to talk about the state's role in offshore wind. Offshore wind is a project that is developed in federal waters, but then comes onshore in the state, and so that is our jurisdiction when it comes onshore. With me is Allison Breezes from the Coastal Zone Management Office, Dan McKiernan from the Division of Marine Fisheries, and Mike Judge, who is our Undersecretary for Energy, will be with us shortly. He got stuck in a little traffic. He should be here in about 5 minutes. So we will be talking about our role, and we'll go through this presentation, and then we're happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Thank you.
So as I said earlier, I'm from EEA. These are our departments. This is the areas that we cover, and the bolded ones are the ones that are represented in some way this evening. They all play a role in the permitting of offshore wind when it comes onshore into Massachusetts. And I am going to jump ahead to coastal zone management to skip the energy portions, and then when Mike gets here, we'll go back to those. Allison, do you want to come up?
We'll do a little shuffle here today. Hi all, my name is Allison Brezius, and I am the Assistant Secretary and Director of the Office of Coastal Zone Management within the Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. As JB said, we're going to skip to the end of the process, if you'll forgive us a little bit here, and begin with the Office of Coastal Zone Management and our role in the offshore wind process. So there are a number of ways in which the Office of Coastal Zone Management participates within the all-of-government approach to offshore wind in Massachusetts, but I'd like to start with our mission, which is to balance the impact of human activities with the protection of coastal and marine resources within the Commonwealth. So that means that with all projects, we are looking at both the environmental opportunities for protection, conservation, restoration, and we're weighing those opportunities with the opportunities for our fishing industries, for our human activities, for our energy needs as a community, for the health of our community, and making sure as much as possible in all of our projects that we're reviewing through both of those lenses. So there are a number of ways that CZM participates within offshore wind projects. Some are ways that many of us all can participate, either other agencies or the general public, such as participation in federal planning and review processes, like the NEPA process. Many of the offshore wind projects to date, or in fact, all of the offshore wind projects to date have gone through the National Environmental Policy Act review process, where agencies from all of the states, the federal agencies, and the public have opportunity, municipalities and the public have an opportunity to comment and weigh in on the potential impacts of those projects. And then the federal government has a responsibility to take those comments in, weigh them in developing the permit conditions or determining whether a certain activity is allowable. Apologies, if this is things that you've already covered, we can happily skip through them. Another way is by representing the Commonwealth and the representatives of the Commonwealth in intergovernmental task forces. So a good example of this is a recent task force, the Gulf of Maine Task Force, which was a group of states across New England, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and others that all had potential impacts to their states from offshore wind that would be developed potentially within the Gulf of Maine, as well as also tribal representatives and municipal stakeholders to participate actively in an iterative review process to take a large potential area that might be used in the development of wind and what we call deconflict it out. So look at where are the areas that are most vital to our fishing industries, where are the critical habitats for right whales and other species, and identify where are those balances, where are those areas that need to be excluded because they are critical for protection of those resources, and then where are the areas that our energy needs and those priorities might be able to be cited. So through a many year, I believe, the Gulf of Maine leasing process started in earnest in 2019. So, and it concluded in October of this year. So through a basically 5-year process of refining and narrowing the scope, they were able to identify a much smaller fraction of the area that could potentially be used for leases to developers, and then that is really the beginning of a much more detailed process through which those groups can then begin an exploration process to look at those lease areas to identify what sub-areas within them might be appropriate for the development of offshore wind. And only then would things like the NEPA reviews of a development process, of a development project get undertaken. We also participate in state planning and review activities. So these are priority planning processes to develop our priorities within the Commonwealth to balance our goals and our interests. So something like the Interagency Offshore Wind Council that was created by the Healy Driscoll administration to do just that, to identify what are our energy needs in the future for clean, reliable energy, and how do we balance that with our marine conservation goals and our offshore wind activities, our opportunities for workforce development, our supply chain needs. All of those elements go into something like that. We also are very active in leading something called the Ocean Management Plan, which, again, we do a lot of planning in coastal zone management, brings together stakeholders from across the Commonwealth to look at what are our needs for our ocean and our resources, and what are the critical habitats there, and how do we balance those and understand where are there prescribed areas that we need to do aggressive protection, and where are there areas that could be used for other uses such as fisheries. And Director McKiernan is going to come up and talk in more detail about that in a few minutes. But I think perhaps the most relevant tool we have in coastal zone management is something called Federal Consistency Review, which gives the Commonwealth a direct voice in federal actions. So anytime there is a federal action taken, and often that is a private project that needs a federal permit, that could be from the Army Corps of Engineers or the EPA or a number of other agencies, that the state has a role and an opportunity to review that action, and before the federal government would issue that permit, affirm or disagree that that action is consistent with the state's policies. They're called the CZM Coastal Enforceable Policies. We can share a link after if it's helpful, but because these are through a federal Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act, they allow us to have a direct voice in those federal permitting processes. And that gets us to sort of the last point there, which is that because of that strong role we have and because stakeholder input is so critical in these processes, we have been in coordination with the Department of Marine Fisheries, with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, with many other agencies across the state, coordinating for a number of years habitat and fisheries working groups, which have been to bring together key stakeholders in some of the potentially most impacted industries in Massachusetts and representing some of our most critical habitat resources. To allow us to have that ongoing dialogue with stakeholders about what is critical, what is most important, and have us reflect that in our conversations with the federal agencies through their federal consistency review and other processes. Through all of those processes, we also have an opportunity and regularly seek public input, and that's why being here with all of you is so important, is to continue to have good open dialogue with municipalities that are potentially impacted, that are seeing the elements of these projects, and so that we can be a voice in reflecting those concerns and issues back up to the federal government in that way. Shall I hand it over now to Director McKiernan to talk a little bit about the fisheries, and then I see that Undersecretary Judge is with us, and then we'll go to the beginning, which is the energy process. But thank you, look forward to questions later.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for having us. You probably know the Division of Marine Fisheries. We collect a lot of fisheries data. We're on the front line with your commercial and your recreational fishermen. I know in Westport, most of your in-town fisheries are municipally managed, the shellfish fisheries. The state law gives the municipality the authority to manage those fisheries, but we still collect all that data. We have data on who fishes, we have data on seasonality, we have data on long-term trends for the different species, and that comes in very handy when a developer is trying to assess like some kind of a mitigation package, or we can be very helpful to CZM or DEP or the Army Corps when it comes to cabling, things like that. So I think our shellfish staff especially can provide a lot of great expertise, much like your own constables will know your waters, but our role has been to provide our sister agency, CZM, with fisheries expertise. We also work with, obviously, the federal government as well. Allison mentioned these working groups on habitat and fisheries. It's been very successful. It's a very open meeting where we've been bringing in the developers with organized fishing groups and any other members who want to attend, and we do those every couple of months, and those have been very, very good at sharing information. So to the degree that anybody thinks that there hasn't been enough information, we've done a pretty good job, in my opinion, in terms of reaching out to the organized fishing groups, the Mass Lobstermen's Association or the Scallopers in New Bedford. So that's worked pretty well. We also contribute a lot of our expertise on things like eelgrass and like I said before, and shellfish to the various agencies such as Army Corps of Engineers and the state agencies as well. And so that's all very useful information. That's how they come to us. And then finally, we oversee some mitigation funds, not the direct mitigation to fishermen, but for example, Vineyard Wind created a fisheries innovation fund that we will soon be in the process of offering some grants to entities, whether it be municipalities or to folks who are looking to work to create coexistence between offshore wind and fishing. Obviously, that's a tall task. You know, some of the gear types are going to have some real challenges fishing within wind arrays. Others not so much. So some of the mitigation funds that have been made available and are now being paid out to some of the fishermen who have fished in the South Fork area and in the Vineyard Wind area you know, we were instrumental in sort of arguing for you know, either, whether it be more money or better eligibility. There's also a navigation fund that Ørsted has set up, and we're working on getting getting Ørsted to reach out to the fishermen to make sure that they can get training in the simulator, so they can navigate through these areas, as well as getting some upgraded radar. So, and then finally, some of the monies that are going to be unspent, and believe it or not, there is money that's unspent, because whether it be the monies are going to be too small, or some fishermen are holding out because they feel if they take the money, they may not be able to join some class action lawsuit someday. There is money that's going to be left over. That money is going to be dumped into some of these community funds. So those funds will be overseen by us, but that will be down the road, not right away. So that's what DMF does. We work very closely, like I said, with our sister agency, CZM, and we look forward to you know, working on this in the future. But I think probably your biggest interest is these cables that are coming through the town. And I would say that our agency, with our statistics for landings by species, by season, and all that, would be, and our knowledge, working with your constables, I think would be able to provide the kind of intelligence that you might need if you're looking to get into an informed dialogue.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Judge. I'm the Undersecretary of Energy at EEA. Did we go through this already, a little bit of it briefly? Okay. So I won't repeat this too much. But I'm just going to do a little bit of context into why are we pursuing offshore wind? Why do we have some of these objectives? But then also talk a little bit about the process for siting and permitting these facilities, at least the state's role in that process. Just starting off with just some of the existing statutory requirements that we have. So the legislature, going back to 2008, has required Massachusetts to reduce its emissions relative to 1990 levels, and those by 80% by 2050. And that was updated in 2021, and it required EEA to establish interim greenhouse gas emission limits for every 5 years. And then it requires statewide limits that are at 50% of 1990 levels by 2030, 75% by 2040, and it should say net zero by 2050 there. It also requires us to establish sector-specific, so this is electric, transportation, buildings, emission sublimits. So for each sector, we have to have emission target reductions for every 5 years. And then we have to publish a clear, comprehensive, specific plan on how we're going to achieve that. So those requirements led to the establishment of a clean energy and climate plan for 2025 and 2030, as well as another one for 2050. Both of those were released in 2022. And so on the graph on the right shows those 4 different sectors there. So non-electricity, transportation, buildings, and then the electric sector. And it shows the schedule at which emissions need to be reduced relative to 1990 levels. So it shows historical emissions up through 2020, and then it shows the rate at which we have to reduce emissions between 2020 and 2030. And then the little diamonds there are the targets, the overall statewide targets. So in order to achieve that, focusing just a little bit more on the power sector, the electric sector of things, there's a lot of different policies that have been implemented that are aimed at deploying clean energy generation or reducing the amount of electricity that we use to avoid the need to deploy clean energy generation. So that's our clean energy and clean and renewable energy portfolio standards, which require a certain percentage of clean and renewable energy to be provided to electric customers every year. Long-term contracts with large-scale generators, so that's things like contracts with Vineyard Wind, contracts with onshore wind resources, onshore solar resources. We have a long-term contract with a large transmission line that's going to bring power down, hydroelectric power down from Canada. That facility is expected to be online in 2026. When that turns on, 20% of our electricity will come from just that power line alone. So these are really large-scale contracts. And then we also have siting and permitting reforms, which I'll get into in just a second. We have distributed solar programs, energy storage programs, cap and trade programs, and then load management programs. This is another really important area where we're trying to keep the amount of electricity that we consume to a minimum as we electrify buildings and transportation, so that we don't have to build as many power plants. We don't have to put as much transmission infrastructure. We don't have to build new substations. But that being said, we are expecting there to be a lot of growth in the amount of electricity that we consume. So this quantifies the numbers a little bit. I want to preface this by saying that these are not, this is one scenario, but this is what's in the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2050. These are the thresholds that we project we need to meet for different technology types. So starting with 2025, we are projecting that we would need over 4,400 megawatts of solar and about 180 megawatts of wind. None of that is projected to be, we projected there was no offshore wind in 2025. But when we start going 2030 and beyond, that significantly starts to ramp up. So our 2030 Clean Energy and Climate Plan projects that we would need up to 3,200 megawatts of offshore wind and 8,300 megawatts of solar. And by 2050, it really scales up to 24,000 megawatts of wind, 27,000 megawatts. And what's driving that is electric growth, electric load growth. So I have one note here. By 2035, we expect that the amount of electricity that we consume as a state is going to increase by about 50% relative to what it is today. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of electric demand growth. And so in order to meet that, we need to build a lot of generation capacity. So that's what's driving a lot of what we do. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state's role in siting and permitting. And this is actually a very active space right now. There was just, the governor just signed a law reforming some of this just a couple weeks ago. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the changes. They're not in effect yet, but I'll talk a little bit about what's coming. So for those who aren't aware, the Energy Facility Siting Board is an independent state board that reviews proposed large energy facilities, including power plants, transmission lines, interstate natural gas pipelines, and natural gas storage tanks. It's been around since the 1970s, and any facility that is jurisdictional to the Energy Facility Siting Board, so this is mostly large transmission lines, large power plants above 100 megawatts, would have to first obtain approval to construct from the Energy Facility Siting Board. So they have to petition the board for approval to construct. There's a fully adjudicatory, complex legal proceeding that unfolds after that, and they have to demonstrate that it would provide a reliable energy supply at minimum impact on the environment at the lowest possible cost. So the work of the Energy Facility Siting Board is supported by the Department of Public Utilities, which has a siting division that supports the board. So they do the technical analysis and the review and then provide recommendations to the board, but the board ultimately makes the decision. And after those projects receive that approval to construct, they then go seek their state and other state and local permits. And so there's a whole process that follows that. So this is an initial gating process, and I'll get into that in just a minute. And then, so you can see who's on the board. There's a number of members of the of folks that work in the administration. So the secretary, my boss, the Secretary of Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, is the chair of the board. The Secretary of Economic Development is also on the board. The chair of the Department of Public Utilities, a commissioner from the Department of Public Utilities, the commissioner of the Energy Resources, commissioner of Environmental Protection, all of them have seats on the board. And then there are 3 public members, one for labor, one for energy, one for environment. The composition of the board is changing a bit, or will be changing in February because of the law that was just signed. Many of the board members will stay the same, but a few are being added. There will be a commissioner of the Department of Fish and Game, commissioner of Public Health will be on the board, but there will also be some new public members. So there will be a representative of the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies and a representative appointed by the Massachusetts Municipal Association. So a couple municipal voices being added to the board, and then also an environmental justice or indigenous sovereignty member to deal with environmental justice and indigenous sovereignty-related issues. So I'm going to talk mostly about the new process that we're moving to, but I want to caveat that this is not in place yet, and it won't be for another year, year and a half, because we are developing regulations, and there's going to be some complex regulations to implement this. So right now, I'll explain, right now the process is still you have to seek approval from the board, then you go get all of your permits. But last year, the governor formed a commission on energy infrastructure siting and permitting reform. That commission met about 15 times over the span of 6 months, provided recommendations to the governor. That ended up turning into a bill. That bill was enacted by the legislature and signed into law by the governor just a few weeks ago. And so at the state level for offshore wind facilities, it would consolidate all state, regional, and local permits into a single consolidated permit issued by the Energy Facilities Siting Board. So the difference here is instead of going through that approval process and then seeking all the permits, everything would be happening all at once in this single proceeding. So all state and local agencies that would otherwise have a permitting role would automatically be eligible to participate in this proceeding and would participate by saying, if we were going to permit this facility ourselves, these are the conditions we would impose on the facility. And those opinions will be given a significant amount of weight and deference by the Energy Facilities Siting Board, but it would be up to them to determine what the final conditions would be. And another important thing here for municipalities participating in this process is that for the first time ever, they will be eligible to apply for financial assistance. So if a project is coming through Westport, say, and you have to engage at the Energy Facilities Siting Board, Westport could apply to the Department of Public Utilities and say, we would like financial assistance to hire expert witnesses, hire attorneys to cover the costs of participating in this proceeding. And that would be weighed and a decision would be issued on whether or not that financial assistance would be provided. There's a fund that's available, and it's available to any kind of under-resourced organization that typically doesn't participate in one of those proceedings, is not a common participant, but it's really definitely, in the context of siting and permitting, very much geared towards smaller municipalities. And then another thing, so once the board makes its decision on the permit, the decision of the board is appealed directly to the Supreme Judicial Court. And another note is their permit decisions have to be issued within 15 months of determining that an application is complete. So there's the new things that are happening here. There's a timeline, a firm timeline. There is a single permit being issued, and everything's rolling into one proceeding. One final thing I just want to note is that today, the Energy Facilities Siting Board actually does have the authority to issue local permits and state permits. They don't do that in their initial proceeding, but what happens is if they issue an approval to construct, then a project is having difficulties obtaining certain permits, they can go back to the board and ask for a certificate of environmental impact and public need, and can be potentially issued a certificate that allows that where the board actually issues all approvals, including local approvals. So what's really happening here is more of a consolidation of the process and not necessarily a change in the jurisdictional authority of the board, but it's kind of just making sure everything is happening on a shorter time frame and that everyone knows this is the place to engage if you want to engage with on a particular project. This just shows, this is just a graphic that sort of shows the current process today and the recommended process. Sorry if it's a little small. We can make sure that people have access to this later. But as I said, the difference is looking at mostly at large projects, which is on the right of each of the two boxes here. Today, large projects seek approval from the EFSB. They get a decision from them. They then go seek all state and local permits. Each one of those state and local permits is issued individually, can be appealed individually, can go through multiple layers of appeals. And so what we've seen happen is it can take 5 to 10 years for projects to move through the process and get a final decision. And that's burdensome on communities, it's burdensome on the developers, it adds a lot of costs. And so what we've really tried to do here is move everything into a single proceeding. And so on the right, on the far right there, you can see now they apply to EFSB, there's one proceeding, one permit, one avenue of appeal. So those changes will be in effect in sometime in 2026. Right now, the deadline for the regulations to be developed is March 1st, 2026. So I'll pause there. I don't know, do we have other slides we're going through? CEC? So Lisa's not here? Okay, I can talk about this. All right, I'll do my best on CEC. So unfortunately, our colleague Lisa Engler couldn't make it tonight, but the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center does play a big role in the offshore wind space. They are a quasi-public agency. They are chaired by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, but they have a number of other board members that direct their work that are appointed by the governor. And their mission, they're sort of they're a quasi-public economic development agency. They do a lot in the way of innovation and support of early stage technologies. And so they, I think this next slide kind of explains their kind of 4 main areas where they work in. So in emerging climate tech, they are helping new businesses grow in Massachusetts. So they make targeted investments in climate tech companies to foster economic development and help companies grow in Massachusetts. They have a whole division focused on accelerating decarbonization. They do a lot of pilot demonstration projects on building decarbonization, transportation decarbonization, also grid innovation and like efficiencies on the electric grid. They have a group that works on large-scale deployment for offshore wind. So they they administer certain tax credits for offshore wind companies. They own and operate the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal. They also own and operate the Salem wind port that's being developed. They also own the Wind Technology and Testing Center is it in Charlestown or is it in the Boston area? Yeah, Charlestown, yeah. And so they own and operate that as well. And then they also have a lot to do in the way of clean energy and climate workforce development. So they have a lot of workforce programs that they run to really make sure that we have the appropriate workforce for the transition that we're moving into, and that there's the training opportunities necessary. Yeah. Oh, hey, Lisa, here. You want to do the rest of it? Sorry.
Thanks, Nick. You're doing great. But
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Apologies for being so tardy. My name's Lisa Engler. I'm the Deputy Managing Director for Offshore Wind at Mass CEC. So Mike, it sounds like, was doing a fantastic job introducing Mass CEC and the Offshore Wind Program at the Clean Energy Center. I'm just taking a deep breath because I ran up the stairs. But so Mike was just talking about the 4 main areas that Mass CEC works within. So now I'm going to talk about the 6 areas that the Offshore Wind Program specifically works on. And just kind of to start things off, I want to say what we don't do. So we don't have any role in regulation and reviewing and permitting the offshore wind projects, any component of them. We also don't do procurement. So the Department of Energy Resources, which is at Mass CEC, is the entity that handles procurement along with other agencies at EEA in support. So we provide guidance and expertise to those 2 roles, but we don't do that. We're not responsible for it specifically. What we do is try to reduce project risk, increase market confidence, and support the economic development and the workforce opportunities of the offshore wind sector. So we know that the offshore wind business sector, the offshore wind industry, is a new industry. We have lots of new industries that we're trying to create in Massachusetts. The governor talks about climate tech and how she wants to create a climate tech sector, much as she has done with health systems in the Commonwealth. And offshore wind is similar and fits in with the vein of climate tech. And so we are working to support the offshore wind sector as a whole. So we do that through planning and analysis. We support all sorts of technical studies and monitoring to collect data and help analyze that data so that the sustainable development of offshore wind can be put forth. We, as Mike was saying, we have our Offshore Wind Works Workforce Grant Program that's been going on since 2017. That program has funded over 57 different projects, 35 organizations, and about $18 million going to those local companies, local organizations to support the qualified training and of these new workers for the industry. A lot of it is retraining, so we have a lot of really good skilled technicians and workforce here in Massachusetts already, but it's taking that existing workforce and training them more specifically to be part of this new industry. We also do supply chain work, so that's supporting manufacturing and other types of businesses in Massachusetts to help them be ready for the offshore wind industry and what the offshore industry may need in terms of supply chain. It's all sorts of supply chain components from tier 1 all the way to tier 4. So tier 1 are those big, larger components. Tier 4 are those smaller components that will need to be fed into the system. And we do that through technical assistance, tax incentives and grants. Oh, and maybe that's the last. Oh, no, this is the last slide. So then there are 3 other pieces that we work on, and that's port infrastructure and harbor access. So we know that this industry is going to need a lot of support from the water side. We know that Massachusetts has a wealth of port infrastructure already. We're a maritime state. We have a strong blue economy already. We have our commercial fishing industry. And that existing blue economy has been using our ports infrastructure for a very long time. However, we need to think about how we can fit in this new offshore wind industry, build the port infrastructure that's needed for offshore wind, but then also think about how we can lift up the port infrastructure that's in existence to support and improve that port infrastructure to support offshore wind as well as the existing maritime economy. A lot of our port infrastructure has fallen into disrepair. We hear this a lot from the North Shore down to the South Shore. And so this is really an opportunity to infuse a bunch of new funding and new attention to our infrastructure and our ports, both for this new industry, but then for our existing industry as well. So we spend a lot of times on port infrastructure. We manage, own, and operate the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal, and we're also working towards doing the same for a new terminal in Salem. Offshore wind science and research is something we do. We collaborate with our academic partners across the state, as well as elsewhere in the country, to try and make sure that we're thinking about the smart long-term planning and deployment, and then also operations of offshore wind. How can we make sure we're doing this in a scientifically sound manner? And then last, we're thinking about offshore renewable energy innovation as a whole. So beyond offshore wind, what are other ocean renewable energies that we should be thinking about in order to meet our Commonwealth's low carbon and net zero goals? And then what can we be thinking about in terms of climate tech as well? So again, fitting within that larger umbrella of this new climate tech corridor that the governor has spoken so positively about and is really supporting. So that's Mass CEC as a whole. Again, apologies for being late, and I think that's the end of our slide deck. So we'll take any questions.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Lisa. So first, I'd like to open it up to members of the committee here. If you have any questions for any of the participants, we'll start with Mr. Bullard.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The first thing I want to say is, as the chairman said, I'm very appreciative for all the members of the state for coming down to Westport and spending some time with us this evening. I really do appreciate the time and you put into the presentation and the time you're spending with us. It's really helpful. And I have a question. I guess it's best directed to Undersecretary Judge. And that is these projects are large that's an understatement but they're also wickedly complex. And for those who came late, my name's John Bullard, and I'm the planning department person on this. And views on our committee differ, probably a lot. And views in the community differ as to what this all means. You know, I've served in local government, federal government, state government. So my bias is probably that I have a trust in government, having spent a lot of time serving in government, and I have a trust in state government. And Westport is part of the state. I mean, we're way in the corner, but we're still part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You found us here. And we see that your job is to protect us and serve us. And that's one of the reasons you've come here. And I happen to see a lot of potential in renewable energy and wind, and I see a tremendous threat from climate change that we see in Westport. I chair, and there are members here on our climate resilience committee. This used to be a huge lobster port. There are very few, as Dan knows, lobsters south of the Cape because of warming waters. But what you see in Westport and a lot of small communities is very stressed budgets, you know, and very small staffs. This is a volunteer, totally volunteer group here, trying to understand a wickedly large, complex issue. I don't know whether anyone's going to propose to put a cable through Westport or not. Maybe not. Maybe we're all gathering for no reason at all because no one's ever going to want to put a cable through Westport, and this is all wasting our time. But if somebody does want to put a cable through here, what the impacts are, what Allison talked about, the balance. I think that's such a good word because you don't balance things against nothing. You know, there's no such thing as the status quo. Everything is changing. How you understand this wickedly complex thing is not easy. And believe me, it's impossible for volunteer boards like ours, for a planning department that's overwhelmed as it is, for Conservation Commission. So you probably see where I'm heading, Undersecretary, you know. And I've dealt with Vineyard Wind. To call them transparent, I can't find it in my heart, much as I like those guys. That adjective just can't dig it out to describe that industry. I'd love for them to be transparent and come and say everything they're doing all the time, but that just isn't an accurate adjective for them. So us getting information on what the developers are up to, you guys are really our best source, and that's one of the reasons why this meeting is so good early on in the process. You coming down and talking to us, telling us what's going on is really important. Again, thank you. But I think it would be really appropriate. You said the Facility Siting Board has something to do with local permits. Well, I think if it's local permits, you know, local resources to help understand all of the impacts on wetlands, on marshes, on shellfish, on, beaches, on you name it, all of the different things, pro and con, because I think there are positive benefits, I think there are adverse benefits, I think there are both. That's the balance that you were talking about. How do you understand the pros and cons? That is wickedly difficult. And you can't do it as amateurs. I think you can only do it with resources to hire people with professional skills. Is there any way that the state can provide, I don't know whether it's the Conservation Commission or what organization in Westport, resources so that if someone says, we want to lay a cable, that the town of Westport says, well, we have the resources to have professionals, that under the direction of a body like the Concom, help us analyze, all the different impacts.
Yeah, so should I just answer
Mi-
from here? Is that fine?
If you could come up to the microphone, just so that.
Okay, yeah. So, so it's a really good question, and I think I spoke to it a little bit. One of the really important pieces of the siting and permitting legislation that was just enacted is this intervenor funding, intervenor support fund. And so what this is it's going to be $3.5 million, maybe a little more annually, that will be available for municipalities or other under-resourced community organizations that want to participate in a siting board proceeding. So hypothetical, your hypothetical that a cable is proposed to come ashore in Westport. What would happen is that project would be, under the new rules that we're establishing, subject to requirements where they would have to do a lot of pre-filing engagement. They would have to notify the community. They'd have to hold some public meetings. We haven't specified all the details of that yet. They'd have to post certain specific information about the project online so that people knew what's coming, and there may be public comment period that has to occur before, and they'd have to show, before they even make a filing, that they had been responsive or had considered the comments and feedback that they had received from the community. But once it gets to the board, then Westport would be eligible to apply for funding from the DPU, and the way that the statute is worded, you can get up to $150,000 in support that can pay for lawyers, technical experts, and to do that exact type of work that you're talking about, and propose conditions, propose changes to the route that is maybe put forward, to oppose it altogether, if that's the case. But you'd be provided some of those financial resources from this fund, so that the municipality is not up against this developer that has all of these resources to bear and is, coming in, and so that the proceeding's not lopsided. And that $150,000, it's not, that is sort of a benchmark, but the law actually does say that you can request more and be granted more for good cause if the proceeding is inherently complex. So that's a really important thing. I can't say exactly how it's going to work yet. We are one of a handful of states that has established a fund like that. There's a few other states that have something similar. I don't know of any that do it in the context of a siting proceeding. It's usually in the context of their Department of Public Utilities, but that's also part of this. So that's one area. And then I think, there's a lot of agencies that are represented and a lot of public entities that are represented. We tried to get, so there will be a municipal representative appointed by the Mass Municipal Association. There will be someone appointed by the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies. There will be a representative of environmental justice communities. So there's opportunities to have input from the board that may be aligned more with municipal interests. The Commissioner of Public Health is on the board now. So there's going to be a public health angle that is examined when these projects are coming in too. So we're really trying to make sure that the right experts are at the table and making the decisions when it's put to the board, but that municipalities have a voice in that process too, and are informed early, have opportunities to weigh in before something's filed, but then also have the resources to participate fully in that proceeding, because we recognize this is very complex and consequential. Yep.
Undersecretary, just a
Yep.
follow-up on that. You're saying that obviously you have a public comment period for the regulations of the law that just passed,
Yeah.
which would probably be a 12 to 15-month window. If there is a project that's impacting prior to those new regulations going into place, is there something in play right now where you could hire? So, as an aside, Conservation Commission, we have the Wetlands Fund.
Yeah.
So there are situations where we have to hire a consultant engineer, an environmental engineer, to look at a specific project because it's outside of the scope of our agent and on the commission. So we technically, I guess, could probably use that in this situation, but is there anything available currently to do that?
Not at the moment, but I mean, that's something we could consider. I think one of this just all happened in the last few weeks, so we're in the midst of kind of thinking through, okay, what are the implementation steps? And one of the first things that I think we really need to think through is this transition period. Projects that apply now, while the existing rules are in place, what happens when the new rule goes into place? Can they move into that process? Are there requirements that are put on them? It's a good question. It's something that we're grappling with and trying to figure out, but we are going to be trying to move as quickly as possible to get these new rules in place too, because I think there's a lot of good things that should help support communities and municipalities in particular once all these rules are in place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions? Constance?
Oh,
I'm sorry. Rick, do you want to go?
Let's go down the.
Go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, obviously, is going to go to Director McKinnon in your role with DMF, and I guarantee you this will not be like the meeting you had relative to the purification plant up on the North Shore. I can guarantee you that. Whether you know it or not, Westport is a historic community of farming and fishing. Mr. Bullitt talked about the offshore lobster industry, that has changed for various reasons. If this cable is to come ashore, we don't know if it is or it isn't or what's going to happen, but my concern of that other sector of the town of Westport, the fishes, the shellfishing people, the finfish people, how is that cable, let's assume the cable is going to pass under the Westport River. I see no data yet, whether it's coming from the Commonwealth or coming from the offshore wind industry on the effects of that cabling under the river. It's a small piece of a huge project, but I hear a lot of conversation tonight, and the common denominator here is money. And people talk about there's money for this and there's money for that. And I see what's happened out in Barnstable. I've heard conversation from friends and associates out on the vineyard in Nantucket. Everything is a one-time payment. Well, our fishing industry here is not a one-time payment. It's a livelihood for a lot of people. It has been for hundreds of years. We have historic oyster beds, which no place else has in the Commonwealth. We have a finfish fishery, which, in fact, we just met with the state 2 weeks ago on how we're going to correct the dams and how the alewives are going to continue to get upriver, which is a common thing going on across the country on spawning of fish. Let's just assume that the cable comes across the narrowest point of the river on the 88 piece. How is that cable going to impact fishing upriver? The largest portion of the Westport River is north and east of Route 88 Bridge. Quahogs, oysters, scallops, finfish, and whatnot. So what I'd ask from you, Director, is if it's possible for us to get the data, if there is any data, from both sides. I would like to hear from the Vineyard Wind side or the proprietor side on that side, as well as the experts that work for the Commonwealth, to kind of let our people know in this community. We're a small community. We're the last community in the state. Rhode Island's right there. So we're at the end of the line in many ways. We want to make sure that that information and data that we have, maybe you can provide to us or someone in your agency can, on the impact of what that cabling could do to the fishing industry.
So are you referring to the impact of a buried cable?
Correct.
And maybe the inability or being a deterrent of fish to pass over it? Is that?
Well, I'm assuming a buried cable, but nonetheless,
Yeah.
those cables, whether they're above ground or under the bridge, or they're underground under the river, they're still gonna have some type of infrared or whatever coming off of that.
Electromagnetic.
We'd like to know,
Yeah,
I'd like to know, more so from you as DMF,
yeah.
to talk about what we can do, or how do we mitigate that, and is it going to be an impact on our culture here in Westport, our fishing culture
Right.
here in Westport?
So I am not an expert on electromagnetic fields on fish behavior. I think that's being researched, to Lisa, you know, in some institutions. DMF is not doing that work, but I was thinking more when they would, to plow the sediment to depress that cable. I mean, that's where our biologist, our DMF could, you know, help with any kind of estimation of if there's damage. I mean, if there's lost income, especially relative to the past to the future. But as far as the impacts of that cable, I mean, that's a really great question. But I don't have answers to that. But presumably, if it's effectively buried, then the EMF, electromagnetic field, will be minimal. I don't know if, Mike, have you any?
I mean, that's my understanding. I'm not an EMF expert either. But I mean, the electromagnetic fields have been reviewed and evaluated pretty thoroughly by the Energy Facilities Siting Board in 3 different siting proceedings related to offshore wind cables. And in each instance, they've found that the expected electromagnetic field was well below any kind of health concerns that have been suggested by public health experts or others. So I think the exposure risk is low. I don't have a specific answer on the effects on marine life, but I know that this has been a topic of discussion. Yeah, I don't have an answer, a specific on that, so.
Well, just to follow through, thank you.
Yep.
It's Undersecretary.
Yeah.
Undersecretary,
Yeah.
yes. So, just to follow through on that, I'm not expecting an answer tonight, nor is anybody, but we would certainly like to have the research done on, and I think it's important that we get the research from both sides, because Vineyard Wind is gonna say one thing, the Commonwealth is gonna say another, and the community is gonna say another. So, I mean, I would like to, for the benefit of the people who make their living on this river and out of this river, and that's just not the people that fish it, it's the people that recreate here in the summertime. If you lose that resource, you lose huge amount of money and resource back to the community. And again, I'm not talking about a one-time payment, we're gonna do this in February of 2050. I mean, this has been history in this community. I'd like to go forward and further out, and if there's a one-time payment, how do we manage down the road damage that could be done down the road? We certainly don't want to lose that fishery. We already lost offshore lobstering. So what I am asking of you folks at the state, there's a lot of acronyms up here. Somebody must be able to get that data for us and share it with us. And you said there's 3 other sightings somewhere in the...
There's three projects that have gone through the Energy Facility Siting Board. And so I could dig into those. The most recent 2 have particularly examined electromagnetic field expectations.
Yeah.
And it's mostly through the lens of, I'm not sure if it's, I don't know how much of it's, because I haven't read those decisions cover to cover, they're long. But I do know that there's specific discussion about the electromagnetic field relative to the impacts on human health. I don't know if it has discussed specifically marine health, but I don't know if Lisa has information on that.
Yeah, so, hi, I'll jump in. So first, I want to say that this project, if there were to be a cable landed in Westport, is quite a few years away. And there's a lot of, let me get to the point.
Please, they've come down here to address us, so please give them the courtesy of answering the question.
So my point in saying that is that there's a long process that includes understanding what the resources and the uses are that are within the space of the project, understanding what those are, and first trying to avoid any overlap with those in the first place, both in space, but then in time as well. And then minimizing any potential impacts. And then if that can't, both those first two things can't occur, then mitigating, to your point, sir, about providing financial compensation if there is some sort of observed or real impact. To the point about research, so I just want everybody to keep that in mind, right? There's a long process still that you all are very encouraged to be part of. To the point about research, so there are a few other projects that are in construction. The cables have been installed, right? So there's some that are landing in Rhode Island. There's some that are, one in Massachusetts that's constructed and landed. So we will learn a lot from those projects as well. And there's research planned to help understand what any potential impacts might be associated with those cables. And I would say that this question is one that comes up often. We hear it. It's a true concern, and we understand that. And there are a few research projects that are being funded by academic institutions and others that are looking at this issues. There's one potential project in Cape Cod Bay that's looking at sand lance and how there might be an interaction between potential cables and sand lance. And then there's also one in Rhode Island relating to all fishing activities and the cables landing there going up the Sakonnet. So there is work underway. There is also work that's been done internationally and work that has been documented by BOEM, and we can forward you the fact sheets that speak to this issue specifically and speak to the potential impacts of EMF from buried cables on fishing.
Thank you.
Actually,
Well, hold on.
I could add, I think there's also some work going on, Lisa, at the south shore of Long Island, looking at whether or not like horseshoe crabs would pass over those cables. So we can look into that. So
Rick's just got a follow-up.
Just thank you very much for that information, Director. I promised you, didn't I? I was true to my word. It was going to be easy. But yes, that's exactly the information that people are asking about, and people want to know. It's obvious the information isn't available right now, but we want to keep that avenue open so that the information comes from all the different sectors. Again, my little piece here is the shellfish, the finfish, but also how that impacts tourism and our community going forward. Not 10 years, 100 years, and that's the important thing here. So I want to thank you for your time. Thank you, Director.
And just to follow up, I think Rick was cheating off of my notes here. I have.
Can't read those hieroglyphics.
I have similar concerns, and the data I think we need to be presented with would be almost a comparable. What I mean by that is we're talking about a Westport River that the crossing is probably 100 feet, 200 feet wide, that you would be going under. So essentially in terms blocking off access to anywhere north of that bridge. There will be data, I'm sure, that you have that has cables, let's say at Brayton Point going up the Sakonnet River. Yes, fish can go on either side of it. There are concerns that you're basically creating a situation where it is a fence, if you will, and how that will impact. And to Rick's point, I don't need to tell you guys, we're starting to see communities pushing back because of the bill of goods that was sold in the first place, right? They had a community host agreement in place, but then they didn't realize the impacts on that community later on, and they're kind of out of luck when it comes to kind of remediating those concerns. And I think that's Rick's point in, kind of into the future. Westport is a small rural community. Our population could almost double in the summertime because of recreational fishing, tourism. We have a beautiful winery and a brewery here. We have beautiful beachfronts. So that's the concern as to how that will impact kind of in the future. The economic impact of those people that come into town, while some people may not enjoy it in the summertime, is very, very important to this town and to the kind of the tax base, since we have a very small or low commercial tax base. So that's, if there is data, it needs, in my opinion, needs to be comparable projects. So thank you. Constance?
well, speaking of comparable projects and what the lady,
Lisa?
Lisa said previously about you're going to be doing some studying of what's happening right now with Vineyard Wind 1 and the 800 megawatt cabling, which is the same amount of cabling that another Vineyard Wind project wants to put through Westport. And you're going to be doing some studying on how that's actually going to impact people onshore and I guess on the beach. I don't understand why don't we, that's being built out right now. Why don't we wait and see before we start building out hundreds and hundreds of more of these turbines and more projects and see, let's study it in real time and actually see what's happening before we push on and then try to mitigate the damage afterwards. I will tell you that I do know for a fact that they have done readings down at Covell's Beach where they brought on the 2 bundles of cabling. And they are getting readings of 79 to 90 milligauss out in the parking lot, which is a lot of EMF. And they're getting readings of about 45 on the beach, sitting on the beach. And this was only, this was in the spring, this was in April, when they did these readings, and there were only, I don't know, less than 10, I think maybe closer to 5 turbines that were actually in operation at that time from Vineyard Wind 1. Of course, no, but they're not in operation anymore because of the blade failure. But those are actual numbers that should be available to your office. They have been doing readings. Citizens have been doing readings out there about what the milligauss is. So I would like to ask a few questions here, beginning with why is the state allowing, actually completely behind Vineyard Wind Offshore, bringing the cables from its various projects, what they're 4 or 5 at this point, off the Massachusetts coast onto community beaches and through our coastal villages, rather than mandating the cable onshoring and routing be done through already industrialized areas, such as, for instance, New Bedford, or better yet, straight up to and through the Boston Harbor. After all, Boston is the driver behind all the inflated energy needs. So why, where's Boston's skin in this game? Let me make it perfectly clear. I don't want to see cabling brought through any area. I'm squarely against industrial wind, whether onshore or offshore. It is fundamentally flawed, environmentally destructive, absurdly expensive technology. But that said, why does Governor Healy and these foreign-owned conglomerates, which are mostly greenwashed divisions of oil and gas companies, Avangrid, which is the owner of Vineyard Offshore, is owned by the Qatar Investment Authority, BlackRock, and the Bank of Norway. Why do you think it's okay to saddle small communities like Westport with this infrastructure burden? Besides,
Constance,
No.
do we have a question? Or
yes, we have questions. I'm
Okay.
asking questions, and I would like an answer at the end. Excuse me, I'm almost finished. Certainly, I'm not going on as long as John did. Besides, and this is specific to this, besides, of course, looking to save companies some money, and because we don't have the resources to fight back, especially now that our state representatives have eagerly ceded the zoning and conservation restrictions, powers local governments did have to the state via the deceitfully named Act Promoting a Clean Energy Grid, Advancing Equity, and Protecting Ratepayers. That's what came out of the commission, which I believe, Mr. Judge, you were the chairman of. We all know ratepayers are going to be sucked dry, and the substation for the Vineyard Wind 1 project was built right next to Barnstable's 40B housing development. Seriously, what are you thinking bringing it through here, Westport? And what of the fact that Horseneck Beach State Reserve is just that, a reserve, supposedly protected under Article 97, an act preserving open space in the Commonwealth. No doubt you all have a quick way around that protection. One more item here. Healy has come out swinging against any plans the new administration might have to put the brakes on this basement bargain sell of the Atlantic seaboard to foreign entities. No doubt the rush to get the Commission on Energy Infrastructure Siting Permitting recommendation signed into law 2 weeks ago after the presidential election was all about trying to make sure the Massachusetts offshore wind projects continue to get built out. She crowed to a Union Hall audience in Taunton that she had a secret sauce to counter offshore wind opposition and President-elect Trump. That Massachusetts is moving ahead no matter what. So 2 questions here. Do you have a plan B if President-elect Trump holds true to his campaign promise to end offshore wind on day 1? And 2, please tell us, what is Healy's secret sauce?
Please.
So I guess I would start by saying I think one of the primary driving motivators here is, as I was talking about before, our Global Warming Solutions Act, our Clean Energy and Climate Plans, but also the legislature has established requirements for us to procure a certain amount of offshore wind by 2027. So we are legally obligated to issue solicitations and enter into contracts with offshore wind projects in order to satisfy those statutory requirements. So that's one of the major driving factors here. And I do think, we really do, there are, I'll also note just about where projects are landing and where they're coming ashore is primarily driven by where the grid infrastructure exists and where and the lowest cost, which is ultimately a lot of this is passed on to ratepayers. And so there's a limit, though, to how much the Cape and the South Coast can actually host. There's not the grid infrastructure in this region does have sort of capacity limitations. There are projects that are planning to interconnect at Brayton Point. The Canal Station could potentially be an interconnection point in the future. But most of the offshore wind development, much of the offshore wind development that may occur going forward through 2050 is expected to actually occur in the Gulf of Maine. And those projects would actually be interconnecting probably in Boston or north of Boston. But if the ISO New England has actually done a study and shows where there is existing capacity on the grid to interconnect and where those locations are. So it's fairly predictable where developers are going to seek, but a lot of that is driven by economics at this time. And then I guess so on the federal level with changes in permit, I mean, there are projects that have permits, that have contracts that have been awarded, that are under negotiation right now. I think we expect that those projects will continue to move forward. We are looking for an all-of-the-above approach. I mean, we are not, we're somewhat agnostic when it comes to clean energy development and deployment. The legislation that was just enacted also has other provisions in there that allow the Department of Energy Resources to collaborate with other states on clean energy procurement for onshore resources. We do not have authority right now. The legislature has not granted us authority to enter into procurements with onshore solar, onshore wind, nuclear facilities, additional hydroelectric facilities. So that is something that we are actively exploring and trying to obtain more authority to diversify our portfolio of resources. But I think no matter how we proceed forward, it is extremely difficult for us to see a future where we do not have a significant amount of offshore wind developed in order to achieve our statutory requirements that the legislature has put forth on us.
But those are just self-inflicted sorts of goals. I mean, that's not something that absolutely has to happen. That's just self-inflicted.
I mean, we follow the law as we are told to. So that's the major motivating factor.
And I just want to know, are you aware, surely you must be, of the Vineyard Northeast project? Because I've read the construction operation plan, every bit of it, and Westport is front and center as the first landing place that they talk about. They've done all sorts of research, and we are throughout that whole COP. So, we're talking about, quote, hypothetical cabling coming through Westport, or will it come through or not? But I'm just saying, read the COP, and you'll see that we're right in their sights.
We're aware of the project, but I mean, nothing has formally come before us in the way of a siting plan or proposal.
And that was going to be my follow-up. So you have not had any discussions on that project?
Not a specific plan around where they actually are. I mean, they haven't come to the state for approval on that. It would have been provided in any materials they responded to in a procurement process, but that's not necessarily the procurement is primarily looking at a different set of factors.
So to follow up on your capacity question, obviously this has to be converted once it comes on shore, the current essentially.
Yep.
So in Westport, where is the capacity? What I mean by that is there's no substation here. There's nothing there, and now there are rumors that there would be a substation on the north end of the town. What do you mean by that capacity when there isn't really a facility here to accept that?
It's more transmission capacity. So like I don't know the specific geography and where exactly the lines are, but there are. The transmission capacity that's in this region that can move it, because the Cape and South Coast will be saturated with the amount of electricity that's coming. So anything else that's coming is going to be moving north, and so that it's about the transmission capacity to move it to other parts of the New England grid. We share a regional grid. All of our electricity comes from different parts of New England and New York and Canada. And so if it can't move out of this region, then it makes no sense to continue to site here. This is actually, I'll give you just another example. Up in northern Maine, there's a number of projects that have been proposed. They cannot get down to lower New England, southern New England, because there's insufficient transmission capacity. So that would be the same thing that projects would eventually face that obstacle in the South Coast region. At a certain point, and I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. We can provide that data to you.
The project you're discussing, they basically gave two routes, right? New London, which again, in my opinion, is industrialized. They have a center there. They have a base there when you go right over the bridge, and then Westport. And so we were told at the BOEM presentations at the high school that it was going to be an either-or proposition. Then you get to some calls with BOEM in August, and conference calls or what have you, and it was, no, we're coming through Westport. So that's the concern, is that, again, people within this community, us on this side of the table, don't have the true facts. And to John's point earlier, we can't get it from Vineyard Wind yet. I mean, we've been playing tag with them, trying to get them, and hopefully they will show up in January. But I think that's the concern. You say there's no project before you, yet they're telling everyone else that, two transmissions, but, we think we're going to Westport. So
Understood.
that's why this has been
No,
created.
completely understand. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Shauna, we'll go around, we'll work our way around. We'll go with Shauna. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say thank you to the folks from the state that came down. I think it's really important that the residents see that you come down, you're willing to answer questions and be here for us. I think I think you can tell we're worried about the possible dramatic impact on our local economy, our local community. We're a small town, we're a historic town, we're very rural, agricultural. And so we're worried about that. And we're worried about our capacity to protect ourselves from these developers. They have a lot of money and we have very little. And so I was really happy to hear about some of the programs you have that might help us during the permitting process to make sure that we have access to expertise. But what I think is super important, in addition to just money to help us when these comes up, I think it's really going to be important for you to help us with the research. We need
I know some people would probably laugh at me saying the state is independent, but we need an independent voice from the developers helping us understand. So whether that's helping to fund academic research, if there's research that we can feel, but we don't have access to be able to create that kind of thing, and we really need that from the state. And I'm assuming you're coordinating regionally and across the world, really, on the research studies. I think we really need your help with getting that. We talked a lot about, it's really hard to talk to Vineyard Wind, and I'm sure the other companies are going to be just as bad. They have more time and money and ability to evade us than we have ability to get them. And so to the extent that you can help us make sure that they're doing the right things, or at least sharing the information, I think we need that from you, our state representatives. And also, I was really, I was pretty neutral on the offshore wind because I didn't really know that much about it. But when we started having that wind turbine debris wash up on our beaches, it became a lot more real for me in particular. Vineyard Wind said they came and cleaned up, but Constance dumped more debris on our desk than Vineyard Wind picked up. So we really need your help with kind of disaster recovery and impacts of that. I don't know that the state had anyone down here, but we need that kind of help. If we have another turbine, washing fiberglass on our beaches, we don't have the resources to clean that up effectively, and Vineyard Wind was kind of slow to do it, and we're going to need state help. So I appreciate that you're down here talking to us, but really help us with those things that we just can't access as a local community. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would also like to say thank you all for coming down here. I know it might not be the most friendly room sometimes. But I could opine at length on my concerns when I see part of a mission statement that talks about energy solutions that have a minimal impact to the environment and at a minimal cost. To me, it seems clearly we're not talking about, with offshore wind, a solution that meets either one of those requirements. But that being said, the purview of this committee is specifically to evaluate potential impacts to the town of Westport. The new permitting process that has just been passed here, it includes a 12-month permitting time limit for municipalities, as well as the 15-month for the EFSB permits. So my concern here is that, does that include the negotiation of so-called community host agreements? And if it does that, what's going to prevent someone like Vineyard Wind from just playing out the string and not agreeing to anything within that time limit?
Yeah, so that's done independently and separate from it. However, the law does include provisions so Energy and Environmental Affairs, one of our colleagues, is actually working on two elements. And I thank you for mentioning this because I forgot to mention it earlier. It requires EEA to establish two types of guidance that are supposed to be used in the process. One of them is sort of a binding requirement, which is that all projects need to undergo a cumulative impact analysis, in which the project is examined through a lens where it looks at all of the existing infrastructure and impacts in the existing community to determine what this additional project will add in terms of cumulative impact. And that is, there will be standards and requirements that are established by the Energy Facility Studying Board for that, following the development of that guidance. The other piece is guidance around how to, for communities and for developers, on how to effectively engage with one another to develop comprehensive and useful community benefits agreements. It is not a prerequisite that a project has a community benefits agreement in place in order to receive a permit. However, it will be looked upon very, very favorably if the community has entered into such agreement, because it indicates some level of acceptance that the community has obtained or given to the project. And so it's, again, not a requirement, but we are developing some rules and guidance around that we hope will lead to good outcomes for communities as they engage with developers.
I must say, given the Commonwealth's clear, given the Commonwealth's clear preference for fast-tracking these permits and removing local control at every possible step here, I can't say I'm very satisfied with that answer, but I appreciate you for trying.
So I hear you. I think, I mean, I think there's a lot of competing interests here, and I know this is I'll say this about the work of the Siting Commission. I think one of the reasons that we were able to get a group of 20, 25 people, I can't remember the exact number that were on it, of very different interests and backgrounds to agree largely on the comprehensive reforms that were proposed, is that the process today is really not working very well for anyone. It's not working for communities who don't have the resources or the bandwidth to understand all these different, these really complex projects. It's not working for the environment, where sometimes environmental impacts are not being considered. It's not working for developers who have to take 5, 10 years to go through long, arduous processes where they may ultimately prevail in the end, but they've spent 10 years and added millions of dollars of cost to the project. So I think everyone was sort of motivated to come to the table and try something different, and we did model this off of some of what other states do. So Rhode Island has a similar process, New York has a similar process, Connecticut has a similar process. So we did look at some other neighboring states, and where there's going to be some lessons learned, and we have a lot of work to do to implement this. But I do think we're trying to move forward in a direction that balances a lot of different interests, whether it's municipal and interests and community interests, environmental justice, environmental interests, and the interests of utilities and developers.
What if a community just says no? We're not interested in a community. What if they just say no?
A community could propose that the permit be denied to this Energy Facility Siting Board, and the board would consider that and look at the specific reasons why the community is saying that this project should be rejected outright, and give some deference to that. But it would be an adjudicatory process decided where the board makes a decision on whether or not to accept that.
Yes, so the bottom line is the Commonwealth will take away any local control at the end. That's the
I
bottom line.
wouldn't characterize it that way. I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities for communities to weigh in, and there are municipal representatives on the board. I think, you know, if the facts that are being presented in that proceeding warrant a denial of the permit could be denied. So.
It always seems as though the chicken's watching the hen house.
More. Excuse me. Excuse me. Members of the crowd, can we please be polite to our guests from the state? Thank you. Maury?
So I also want to thank you all for coming down. I know the commute from Boston can be 2 hours during rush hour, so that explains why a couple of you were late. I'm most interested in the help that you can give us, reiterating some of the other comments here. And it's clear that the Siting Board has a lot to do with a transmission line that would come underground 10 miles up, supposedly Route 88. And so we would need that money, that grant money, to help us research the environmental impact, the fisheries impact, and all other impacts. And also, the community host agreement is extremely important. I think I read someplace Barnstable's agreed to get the transmission line on Covo Beach. They're getting something like $1.5 million a year for 25 years. And so that kind of money could go a long way to help mitigate the fisheries, not just the first year and the upfront money and all, but for an extended length of time. So that's where that agreement is so important. If you know, the powers that be actually do force Westport to take this transmission line. So we'll be in touch, and I do thank you for coming by. This has been enlightening for me.
Thanks, Maury. Question for the Undersecretary, and does it fall under your purview or the Siting Board? Long-term decommissioning of the infrastructure. As you know, probably over the past 5 to 10 years, these companies have been sold off numerous times. We see the similar situations with the solar industry, right? You never know who the owner is at the end. So decommissioning of these, where does it fall? How does it, because let's assume how fast technology moves, maybe in 15 years or 10 years, No, it's obsolete, and we're stuck with a cable running right through Westport and maybe a
Yep.
substation or what have you.
No, it's a good question and something that I think we have considered. My colleagues from the Department of Energy Resources aren't here. They could explain this a little bit better in more detail, but as a condition of entering into a contract for the long-term energy and renewable energy certificates that are produced by these projects, the project developers are required to establish a trust fund. So that fund is then used to go towards the decommissioning of the project at the end of its life, regardless of who the owner is. That's my understanding of the process. And JB, I don't know if you have any more details on that, but yeah.
No, they're not. They waived it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not. They don't have to put down a
So-
penny.
That is how the system is supposed to work. I don't have the details on the 2 projects that have already signed. Can you guys hear me all right?
There you go.
I don't have the details on the 2 contracts that were signed initially. The 3rd contract, they did not waive it. There's a trust fund, and it is a requirement for any project going forward, which may include this project, would have to have a decommissioning fund.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. The procurement statutes that govern the procurement process have evolved quite a bit over the last several legislative sessions. So this was originally done in 2016, and so the first Vineyard Wind project was done under that procurement rules that existed at that point in time. Those have changed, and so to JB's point, I think it is now a requirement of any new project that's entering into a contract, and I don't think there's any waiver that can be allowed. I don't, Allison, if you have a...
It's not true.
Just an addition for the in-water infrastructure and those elements, there are requirements through as part of the conditions of the leases that BOEM authorizes for decommissioning, and there is a federal agency, the Bureau of Environmental Safety and Enforcement, that has oversight to enforce that those areas are, that those turbine farms are decommissioned safely and securely at the end of their life.
No, BOEM waived all the fees for the projects. Not, for 15 years, in 15 years.
The Gulf of Maine ones going forward certainly have those.
Yeah, they're not required to put any money down in escrow or anything for 15 years.
But at that point, then they are, yeah.
Oh, excuse me. Rick?
Just to follow up on that, you use, and to follow up on the chair's question about decommissioning, you speak of contracts. These companies have already voided contracts, already walked away from them. In my world, a contract is a contract, and you don't renegotiate that contract until the expiration date of that contract. So when we speak of contracts, it makes me nervous, because these companies have so much money that to walk away from a contract is troubling for all of us. So I don't know if we've learned, if the Commonwealth has learned a lesson. I hope that they have, relative to these contracts, and how valid and how strong are these contracts when they say 15 years out, there's money there to decommission. And like the chair said, companies change hands, change ownership, like you change your socks.
Yeah. So the termination of those contracts did ultimately, in 2023, had to be agreed to by the utilities. The utilities are the counterparties to those contracts. And under the terms of those contracts, the developers had to pay penalties for canceling them. So I don't know, was it 60 or 100 million that came back between the two? 100. So $100 million will come back to electric ratepayers as a result of that. Those companies are paying for terminating those contracts. Going forward, we're in the midst of negotiating new contracts with a couple of those facilities. There will be different terms and different standards, and I think some lessons learned from that, the fallout of that. So, but in the end, ratepayers didn't pay anything for those contracts, but actually received $100 million because the developers terminated them.
Thank you.
One more question. John?
Actually, it's not a question, 2 quick points. One, Shauna mentioned research, which I think is a good idea, and a couple of people said, well, we'll have research that backs up one point of view and another research that backs up another and another research that'll back, I've worked in a scientific agency for 10 years, NOAA. research should be research, you know, it shouldn't be backing up one point of view. And I do encourage research into this issue of impacts, marine impacts on cables. And I think that's a very serious subject. And one of the state agencies that's around here is SMAST, and I would hope they would, among others, be utilized. This is not the first cable that's ever been put in the water, or electromagnetic with cables. So I would hope research would be started right away in terms of cables that exist, that carry electricity, that have electromagnetic fields that affect sea life, because that's an important issue. And SMAST, among other institutions, should be able to gather information that isn't aimed at one side or another, that just is aimed at what do we know about this stuff. The second point is decommissioning is a very important issue, but it's one thing if you're talking about a turbine where you want it, if it stops being used, to be removed. But it's another thing, I think, if you're talking about a cable, because I'm not sure you want it removed, right? You might want to be leaving it there, right? If you're going through all this effort to bury it, if there's no electricity going through it, going to a lot of work to remove it may do more harm than leaving it where it is with no electricity running through it. But so I think the issue of decommissioning a cable that's underground may have different treatment than decommissioning a turbine that's in the water.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
But just a follow-up comment on decommissioning. If you look at the nuclear power industry, they were building nuclear stations all through the 60s and 70s, and it wasn't until after 3 Mile Island in '79 that the federal government established the nuclear decommissioning trust funds, that every reactor had to have one. And so they discovered a need afterwards. So the fact that you don't have a decommissioning trust fund from day one does not mean you can't have it in year 10 or year 20. No, just a comment.
Thanks, Maury. We wanted to open it up to members of the public. If we keep this civil, and the questions remain civil, I will keep it open for a couple of questions. Just one point before I take a question. I would first like to at least invite, the members down here to maybe come down for a tour of Westport to see exactly, what you're dealing with down here. I don't think, Vineyard Wind hasn't even done soil samples or, boring of Route 88, right? I mean, this is going to be Westport's big dig, if it gets to that point. I don't think people realize kind of the impact on the town if this cabling does occur. So, I would at least invite you guys to maybe come down for a field trip with members of the committee to see what we're talking about, because it's difficult for you guys to see what we're saying when we're talking about, a fence across Westport River and where it would be coming on shore at Horseneck Beach. So leave that open as an option here in the future as we get further down in this process. Lisa?
Sir, could I just respond to Mr. Bullard's comment?
Yes, ma'am.
So I don't want anybody here in the room to walk away tonight and think that research has not been ongoing for a long time and continues. So what I meant by coming up research is that we're continuing to look for new research questions to facilitate and help stand up with academic partners. You specifically mentioned SMAST. So SMAST and Dr. Stokesbury specifically is involved in a lot of research related to the ongoing work relating to offshore wind. We have 2 working groups, a habitat working group and a fisheries working group, that have been in existence since 2008, when the southern New England wind energy areas were delineated. And those groups are comprised of, for the fisheries working group, it's fishing industry, it's academic partners, it's NGOs, it's developers and state and federal agencies. And one of the things that comes up through that group are questions from that community. And so through the years, research questions have been asked and funding has been put forward to help answer those questions. In addition, at a regional level, there are two groups that help facilitate this same type of research question and answer and funding partnership. One is the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance, which focuses on fisheries and offshore wind interactions. And the other is the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative. I apologize for all the acronyms, but they are focused on habitat, so air, water, and benthic habitat interactions with offshore wind. RWSC specifically has a really great resource online that lists all the research that's ongoing right now from states Maine to Virginia, all the way down the coast. And so we can send those resources to you, but I don't want anybody to walk away tonight and think that we're not doing research. Research has been ongoing for quite some time, but we're acknowledging that there are new questions and concerns that we're hearing from communities like yours. And so we want to make sure we're being responsive to those as well.
Good Westport resident,
Thank
Kevin.
you. Thank you. All right. As I said, I'll open it up to members of the public for a few questions. I see your hand first. Please come up to the microphone, give your name and your name and address, and we'll go from there.
Hi, I'm Phil Weinberg. I'm a member of the Conservation Commission. And I just wanted to understand a little more this relationship between the permitting process at BOEM and what's proposed under this new framework. Because as Constance said, you know, and if you go on the dashboard, the Bureau of Ocean Management dashboard, this is an active project. It is projected to be completed for the federal project in September of 2025. And I don't understand if the presumption is that because of what Massachusetts is doing now, that process is going to be paused, or that when sometime in 2026, the new process is set up, you will have a completed BOEM environmental impact analysis. I don't know if they actually give permits. Maybe whatever they do, there'll be a final, the potential to be a final decision. And again, because I've looked at the documents, and there's very detailed, I mean, relatively detailed maps showing the cable route, going through Westport. There's one to Connecticut and there's one to Westport. And there's been a preliminary environmental impact analysis of all of that. But the thing is that this is part of the question, so when BOEM is going to track a route going through federal waters, which is, I don't know, 90% of the route, into federal waters before the state has jurisdiction. And I'm trying to understand how it would work out that if we had questions about the route and the landing in Westport, how that would then completely alter what BOEM has already laid out. Because you said, well, we want it someplace else. We want it moved a mile to the west. And related to that is, I understood that a lot of the agencies here coordinate with BOEM while this is going on. So this is not coming new to you, right? So you're gonna be involved in whatever final decision that BOEM makes on the route going through all the federal waters. So I guess I'm asking how much is going to be baked in to the route before it gets to this process several months or more down the road before the state actually looks at it.
Sure. Thank you, sir. I think this is a joint answer. So Lisa and I can start. I'm inviting Lisa up, who, while she now works at CEC, she was the Director of Coastal Zone Management for the siting of the last several projects, so has a lot of good expertise here. So as you said, BOEM has an extensive, or BOEM has an extensive siting and permitting processes, and CZM and other agencies within the Commonwealth have an opportunity to participate and weigh in and give feedback, saying we'd like to see other alternative routes. We'd like to understand the impacts or the comparative impacts of the resources that would be implicated in one route versus another. So we do get to participate actively in both the BOEM process through the NEPA review and other parts of it as it goes. Once it gets into state waters, it also enters into a set of state review through CZM and through DMF and other agencies that then look in particular at the state waters elements of the permitting. And then once it gets to onshore, the AFSB, the siting and permitting, really triggers. So this is as you said, a very complex orchestration of multiple state, federal, local permitting that really needs to happen as much as possible with people weighing in throughout the process. So if we say that, so for example, they might get very close to state waters and have worked most of that process with BOEM, with us having some way in, but then there will be alternatives that we would look at to say, what we'd like to see different options for sites coming into Massachusetts. We'd like to understand what are the impacts to the river, what are the impacts to any wetlands or beaches that might be the alternatives, what are the trade-offs of moving it to the west, to the east, alternative sites. And so we would have much more extensive review and oversight through that piece. Obviously, as you said, it's circular, right? If we ask them to go farther in one direction in state waters, they can either route that uniquely through state waters, or they could go back and try to rearrange the siting of the federal water component of the transmission. So there can be, and there has to be, an enormous amount of iteration to get this right. And one of the big priorities for us all is to make sure, as we talked about before, we're finding the balance, that we're working to push the developer to work with us as much as possible to get that right balance, to find the place in the siting that is avoid our critical resources, as Lisa said, as much as possible first, then minimize, and then mitigate at last if there's no other option. So I think there is a long set of process to say, yes, they have presented an alternative. They are likely to, I believe they have more than one alternative, and we have many opportunities in that process that Lisa talked about for us to say, no, we would like to see further alternatives, or we're concerned about the impacts into this area, either from resilience, from the beach component, or from the habitat areas. So it's not a simple answer because there's just, as you there's going to be so much iteration of merging of those processes. Mike, do you want to talk about once we get on shore? Is there anything to add?
I don't know if there's too much to add. I mean, I think once it gets to the state has jurisdiction, the Energy Facility Study Board has jurisdiction in state waters and onshore. And so it's sort of the last step in the process. It's the final piece of the project to get it connected to the electric grid. But they do a similar alternatives analysis, and there's often multiple routes proposed about, okay, how do you route it so that once the cable's ashore, it can get to the substation. And so there's an iterative process there as well.
Thank you.
Right.
Sorry, Phil.
I kind of understand that.
Yeah.
It was more like you're at the point that happens, this, the impacts of the state saying, no, I really think this cable should go up the Secundit River, because that's going to change the entire route.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about, I think, is what is the variations in the route, assuming it's going to land at Horseneck Beach.
Oh, no, sir.
That's what I'm saying.
Apologies for that. Yeah.
I am saying, so should the town be getting involved, so to speak, at the BOEM level?
Yes.
And, and looking for advice on how we would do that. And also, Conservation Commission to access, to actually require the proponent to provide money to the commission to hire its own expert, assuming that we're enforcing the Wetlands Protection Act. I'm not even sure where the Wetlands Protection Act fits into this anymore. It's more avoid, it's very loosey-goosey as compared to what the Wetlands Protection Act requires. So, I'm not saying you have to have answers to all that, but I think the earlier we get into the process, the more likely we will be able to influence the kind of questions that are being asked here, which is there, whenever you think about offshore wind, is there a better endpoint or landing than Westport? And I think it's too late to do that once the OEM has issued its permit.
So there is still a lot of opportunity, and I absolutely agree with you that the earlier everyone can engage in the process, the better. Because if we see, as we look at those alternatives, if we see other sites along the coast that are preferable, there is absolutely still an opportunity to talk to the developer through the BOEM process, understanding that the state process is coming, to say it is likely for them that a more direct route to that alternative site would mean a different path through federal waters, right? We're not to the point where there is no decision on that left. Is there anything you want to add, Liz?
So I would just suggest to the committee that, to think about how that interaction through CCM, could happen now, even though it's, maybe years, going out. Before.
Phil, the comments period for this project, for the environmental impact statement, closed last spring. So a lot of people already made comments. I know I did. And, we make comments on a lot of the projects, but the BOEM part of that and the comment, and input, for what you want to call it, period, it's already closed. Does it reopen somehow? Is there a point where it reopens?
I'm saying there will be further review periods that will be forthcoming
Okay.
as more details are presented. And there will be state comment periods that will then, as I said, potentially, based on that feedback, have impacts to say, please go back and relook at the parts in the federal if that's warranted.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman in the back, and you'll be next, ma'am.
John Herron, I work in the fishing industry. Several years ago, I spoke to the developers of the Block Island 5 turbines, and I asked them how they were going to decommission their project. And they said they were going to cut them 35 feet below the water line and walk away. There is a solution we can ask for and get 100% decommissioning. We could ask that the end purchasers of the electricity, which would be electric companies, be liable for the decommissioning costs. And they won't do that. Everyone in this room knows that they're going to set up an LLC and they're just going to walk away. They're going to pass it on to someone else. Also, you talked about the information and the impact on fisheries in Westport. I can get that information for you, and could I present it to your board at the next meeting?
Oh, next.
We're going to figure out our agendas in the next couple meetings, and
Sure.
we'll discuss it and probably get you on one of the future agendas.
All right, and Constance, I think you have 2 more minutes' time. John Bullard spoke longer than you.
This one right here first, sorry. A couple more questions, and we'll let you come up to the microphone. Yep, thank you.
Hey, everybody. I'm a teacher, but still sometimes talking to a group can be a little nerve-wracking. But, just thinking. Oh, sorry, Charlotte Duhamel. As a teacher, I think about how do we present both sides of an argument, right, to get to the best solution. And I'm sure you guys too. You want to know, what are the people that are supporting me thinking? What are the people who disagree with me thinking? And so you want that rigor, right? So I would be curious as to how you guys make sure that that happens, right? And I know, you can bring fishermen on board and you can bring people, from environmental protection groups, and that could seem perhaps like they would, be the ones to go to, and they may be, but they may also be supporters of these projects. And, yes, there are many people who claim to be independent, but it's easy to look at their research. Or for instance, if you go to just URI for your research into Rhode Island, you know that they take money from offshore wind. So is that part of it too? Do you vet those people? If NGOs or academic institutions are taking money from offshore wind, do you say, you know what, maybe not? And who could I bring that disagrees with me? Who are the people who don't want any of this? And what are they saying? And how do I incorporate that? And then is there a certain point at which you say, what could it take? What would I have to know to say, you know what, this is not a good idea? And even if you have a mandate and the law says you must, the law isn't going to throw you in jail, right? You are individuals. You can say, you know what, I don't have to do this, right? I know it's your job and that's your livelihood and you believe it, but what would it take for you to learn or understand to make you say, you know what, I can't do this. So, thank you.
Gentleman in the back, I prefer questions instead of.
Hi, my name's Dave Pease, and I'm just a kayaker. And I have a few points I'd like to bring up on a bit of research that I did on this subject. The environment that we're speaking of is very critical, and we all know that. And as far as the decommissioning and the turbine maintenance and all of those other things, they'll probably all fall by the wayside eventually because someone will walk away. But there's a lot of other things. There's a lot of benthic species, bottom-dwelling, long-term effects with the electromagnetic fields and things of this nature. Some of them have been studied in other countries. Europe's done a study on it. You can look it up online. There's a few other things. The type of cable that's used, fish migration in the Westport River, will that be affected? Possibly. Cable routing, up Route 88, clear cutting, water issues, people's wells, buffer zone. There's a lot of stuff falling from the sky that lands on the ground when you cut down all the trees and you put in solar farms and things of this nature, and they seep into the ground and they pollute people's wells. Are those going to be addressed? How will the watershed be protected? Hazardous oils in the transfer stations. What about a hurricane? Hurricane of 38 probably sent a big wall of water up the Westport River. If the thing's too close to the water, could be a problem. Some of the points that you made about electric usage going up, well, you're certainly pushing the electric usage issue in that direction. The transition time, meetings, the public's being addressed. For those of us who came early, we prepared. We had some questions.
Sir, are you going to get to a question, or are we going to?
Well, I'm making a few points that maybe everyone can think about over the next month when we have another
You're
meeting.
supposed to ask our guest a question. If you're going to stand
Okay.
there and pontificate, then I will ask you to
Well,
sit down.
I think it's important that we pontificate on certain things that we all get to look at and think about. Mentioning the cable coming from Niagara Falls, right? That isn't here yet, and I don't think it's going to get here either. But I know we want it here. So has there been a complete environmental analysis done of this whole project? Does anyone have an answer to that question?
Currently, there is no specific project before us,
Well, it seems as though the project is before us as we're
but
speaking.
it is in the BOEM process, the federal process, before it has gotten to the state. So there has not been a state-level environmental impact done on this yet.
Well,
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Gentleman right there. Yep, and then that's.
Good evening. Mike Armenia. I'm a lifelong energy
Your name,
engineer.
sir?
Michael Armenia.
Oh, thank you, sir.
I'm a lifelong energy engineer, having done most of my work for the government, including solar, wind, and even nuclear. I just have one question. I'm looking at this slide in front of me here that says Mass CEC is doing reducing project risk, et cetera. What role did Mass CEC have, if any, in allowing the GE Vernova blades that were tested in Boston to be cut up before they were tested? Because that is something, as an engineer, that we would never even consider, especially if the blade had to be tested in torsion, which it could not be at that facility.
I'll start, and then I think my colleagues will help answer. I would just say that, well, I was going to defer to my colleagues at the WTTC. So the wind turbine testing facility, testing center is a facility owned and operated by Mass CEC, where we test both onshore and offshore blades. And the protocols that are used to test the blades are set by international standards, and we follow those. And so I would just say that in terms of cutting the blade, that was facilitated and set up by the industry standard and checked by engineers. And it wasn't cut up. I would just clarify. There was a piece that potentially was, Mike, do you? Yep.
There was actually a really good article in the New Bedford Light about this today. There was a, me or? Yeah. Yep. 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 So there was actually a very good article in the New Bedford Light today that went through this in detail and explained sort of what happened, some of the fallout with GE Vernova. What I can say is the Wind Technology Testing Center, the facility is not long enough to accommodate the newer length blades at the full length. But as I understand it, and I'm not an engineer on these things, that does not have any impact on the ability to stress test the blade to the manufacturer's specifications. And it also would not have identified the issue with this particular blade because it was a defect that occurred in the manufacturing at the plant, and it wasn't a design flaw. It was a manufacturing, as per our current understanding, manufacturing error. Well, I can say the federal government has come in, the Bessie has come in, the agency that oversees this, and has been examining and testing every single one of those blades and looking into whether there's a similar defect in any of them. And some blades have been removed. There's blades coming in from France that don't have those similar defects identified. Those, we expect that those will eventually be installed. Some have been installed, actually, were installed prior to the incident. So.
The blades twist and torsion. Just be clear that the facility that you have is testing flexure, not torsion. And you need to test them in torsion.
I can't speak to the engineering specifics that's tested at the WTTC, so, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Undersecretary.
I've got to follow up with that.
Okay.
Which I would really.
Chris, then one more question from the public because we are getting long tonight.
I just would like to clarify, is the Mass CEC still testing blades that are not long enough to fit in the facility in whole? Is that
in whole, yes. There are some. There's efforts underway to look at expanding the size of the facility to accommodate the longer length blades. When that facility was first built in 2010 or so, blade sizes were just much smaller. And so I think the industry has, you've seen innovation in blade manufacturing that have allowed for longer length blades. But as I understand it, that does not have an impact on the ability to test it
But
to the
just to
manufacturer's
clarify, the
specifications.
Mass CEC is still testing blades by cutting off approximately 30 feet.
It depends on the blade and the length of the blade, but they do cut off the tip of the blade. But as I understand it,
The
it does
Mass,
not
the Mass
impact.
CEC is certifying blades
No.
or
No.
testing these blades.
They don't certify the blades. They stress test the blades to the manufacturer's specifications to determine how the blade will perform, because they can the design of the blade, they can test it and simulate the impacts of wear and tear over decades by rapid movements and other things. I'm not the engineering expert, so I'm a little outside my depth in getting to the specifics.
But the bottom line is these blades are still being cut before they're being tested. Is
Yes,
that correct?
in some cases, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary. And last question from this woman in the front. Just state your name. Matt, the microphone. You're good?
Hello, my name is Janice Dye, lifelong resident. Welcome to Westport. I've never seen such a big contingent coming down here. I'm thinking you're trying to gather information from us to see, to help with your research, where you don't have a lot of answers, it seems to me, this evening. I see a lot of word salad. And so I do have a couple of questions here. So is the state or Vineyard Offshore willing to pay the electricity bills of all Westport residents for as long as this project is operative, since it will be the Westporters taking on the risks? Is the state willing to give each resident a yearly stipend to offset their loss in property values? And to local businesses dependent on summer beachgoers, should tourism decrease because of families' reluctance to visit a high-voltage beach area and to deal with the inconvenience of 2 years of construction?
Thank you.
So I can't speak to the answers to any of those questions. But I mean, I do think these are questions that can be discussed in, if a project were to come to Westport, these are the types of things that could be discussed with the developer as potential ways to mitigate impacts and through a potential community benefits agreement. But
Thank you, Undersecretary.
There's one more.
One more question. Go ahead.
Thank you for your time. My name is Karen Gleason. So, a couple of things. I'll be quick.
Thank you.
The word infrasound, I'm assuming you know what that means. If you do not, I want people in this town to understand what infrasound means and the impact, the negative impact it can have on human health. It's critical. I'm kind of a little insulted because my town has a host community agreement in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. And I feel like listening maybe to you, sorry your name, that I'm going to be the guinea pig. Because you're going to do research and studies on communities that are laying down cables, and let's see what happens over time. And I'm very concerned about EMFs in our neighborhoods, in our beach. Because we have a big beach, it's a recreational beach. And so we signed an agreement January 16th, 2024, so almost a year ago. So much has happened in the past 11 months to other communities. So you're an advisory board. And boy, I really hope that. Don't rely on these folks, and no, I'm not trying to be insulting at all. You need to do your own research, your homework, and any money that you can spend on having experts. I'm deathly afraid of leukemia and the sites where the cables are in my town. I've heard some pediatricians say the same thing. So you need to know about leukemia or any other diseases that can harm people. I've been to so many of these question and answer dog and pony shows, I call them. And infrasound's never been mentioned. Leukemia has never been mentioned. And I'm sure there's other host things that I don't know about. I've learned a lot about fishing from fishermen for the past few months. So I can't even tell you to advise your community if they do come here to say no. They kind of like back you in a corner. We just had a meeting the other night about having a noise variance, an advisory opinion, not a definitive opinion, but an advisory opinion to the Energy Siting Board. Should South Coast get a noise variance? So town noise variance decibel level is like 65 during the day or whatever. Well, that's our variant. I mean, that's the ordinance. They want to go over that, or they might not go over it. If you're not going to go over it, then why are you asking for a variance or an opinion about a variance? And so we call them town councils, you guys are select boards. Our council said they voted no, but they also informed us, just because they said no, that means the Energy Siting Board can just overrule whatever we say anyway, because think about it. They come all this way over the past year. It's actually been 3 years because they've been wheeling and dealing behind the scenes with different community folks, paying people off and whatever, not people, but, you know, little leagues and whatnot. So I just want you to take all that into consideration because it is crucial. There's no going back once you get started. And I'm really hoping that if it doesn't come down here, it doesn't come to the our beach, because they're asking for not just one set of cables bundles, 375,000 megawatts of voltage power that I'm going to have to ride over in my car or walk across on the beach, but they're going to make it wide enough so that another bundle could come through. That's a lot of high voltage power. So I'm sure you're all thinking like, oh, I hope they go back to Portsmouth because we don't want to be here. But we had some Westport people there when we were going through and saying, don't say Westport, don't say Westport. So here we are, we're all in this together. And you know what? I'm glad I'm here tonight, and I hope that you guys can come and chat with us because we all need to communicate. We're operating in a vacuum. We're being isolated from each other, and that's not good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. The one thing she did point out was obviously health concerns. I know there's been recent research about the ultrasound or, you know, the offshore. I'm sure everyone around this table has driven past UMass Dartmouth. They used to have a wind turbine up there, and I know that was causing issues in that neighborhood as well, and that no longer exists at UMass Dartmouth. So I don't know the exact reason for that, but I heard reasons because it was having kind of some detrimental impacts. I know we're dealing with wind turbines that are 50 to 30 miles offshore, but again, you start looking at some more research, it would have some impacts with respect to that. All right, that kind of closes your presentation and your time here, so I appreciate you guys making the trip down. Could you provide that PowerPoint or email it to me tomorrow, and then we can obviously make it available to anyone that wants it. And again, I hope that this opens up kind of a line of communication as this project, if it does move forward, that we are involved in that process, you know, along the line. So thank you for your time. I know you're going to get back to Boston. We only have a few other agenda items, so you're more than welcome to step out. So thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
So just looking at our agenda we have here, we'll get through this real quick. We've been going pretty long at this point. First and foremost, we wanted to have a quick discussion on possible meeting topics for our January meeting. We are basically made a decision to meet on a monthly basis. So in January, we will be looking at some meeting topics. We were trying to get Vineyard Wind. I'm still going to be working on Vineyard Wind to hopefully make an appearance in January. So that's probably the number one topic. Do we want to have a quick discussion on backup topics, Constance?
I would actually like to present this particular project and what is laid out in the construction operation plan and the cabling route and other specific information that's taken from the BOEM report. And I've got the slides to do it. I think I could walk the community through it so that they would have a good idea of what we're talking about here with this project and what's being proposed here.
If we could have Vineyard Wind present their project as opposed to Constance, I'd rather have Vineyard Wind present their project.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I think it's worth noting, if Vineyard Wind is not going to be responsive, if a presentation were to be given to the committee by Constance or whoever that takes items directly out of the BOEM documents, I think that would be, I guess, the best option in lieu of Vineyard Wind being here.
I'm okay with that, as long as we obviously keep it to the topic at hand.
All the
obviously.
information I have comes directly from the BOEM website.
Okay. So for our, Maury?
And I just want to mention that Vineyard Wind's not the only project that might come here. There's another project called New England Wind. It used to be called Park City. It's now New England Wind.
That's Vineyard.
And the Commonwealth signed an agreement for 791 megawatts offtake in just this past September. They are not specifically targeting Westport, but they're targeting Cape Cod as one offtake area, and then also Buzzards Bay. And so their little map shows that the range of Buzzards Bay starts with Westport and goes, pretty much, I guess, to New Bedford or so.
Okay.
But that's the second one that we really should keep an eye on.
True.
Okay.
Along with Vineyard Wind.
Okay. I mean, Constance does have background in understanding most of these topics, so I'd be okay if the next meeting we don't have Vineyard Wind present, we can, at least take a presentation that, again, to more of an education standpoint, because we obviously just had the state here, so we want to make sure that people are aware of the project specifically. Yes.
Mr. Chair, for the record, has Vineyard, I know you've made multiple calls or multiple attempts to reach Vineyard Wind. For the record, have they responded at all?
Yes, Vineyard Wind has responded. They actually wanted to have a discussion with me on a call with their team. I said that probably would not work. We are an advisory committee, and because of open meeting laws, I'd prefer to have a discussion in the public. So I will continue to work with my contact there to hopefully get a representative here in January. So I will have hopefully a discussion with just him to give him a layout of what this committee, or this advisory committee is set up for, and then hopefully have a team of them to come in January if possible. So
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we will look at that as our possible options. Obviously, option one would be Vineyard Wind. Option two would be a presentation from
Option two.
Well, if we can get Vineyard Wind to agree to a date, you're going to get bumped.
Okay, that's fine, but I would like to make this presentation to the
Nope.
public at some point.
No, and that's fine. I think, again, you will have more of the specifics as to the impacts here in Westport. So we will do that. It's, again, I want to leave options open because with the agenda and the open meeting laws, I want to make sure that both topics would be possibility come January. So
I wonder if it would be better to have Vineyard Wind come in after the inauguration, because things might change.
inauguration's what, January 20th, I believe. So I don't know if it'll be right off the bat. So I would,
Yeah, okay,
let's try to get them in here.
okay.
So thank you.
But we're going to stick with this Thursday night at 5:30?
Yes. So set the next meeting date would be January, I believe, we're looking at
The 16th?
the 16th, yes. So the next meeting date, if it works for everyone, would be
2025.
January 16th at 5:30. Same location here. Obviously, an agenda will be posted for the public as to, what we have. So it is on the town website. It gets posted usually, this was a little late, I was traveling on business last week. It usually gets posted 48 hours in advance. Next month, I'll try to make sure to get it in there earlier, but that was more of getting the state to agree, and so the agenda took a little while, but it is posted on the town website.
And if you would like, you can give me your email address and I'll let you know personally.
Yeah. Well, depending on the attendees. Okay, so January 16th, 5:30, is everyone okay with that meeting date?
Yep.
And topics? Chris?
I won't be able to attend that meeting, but
Okay.
understand if, let's go ahead, no worries.
Thank you. All right. The following week, I have to travel for business as well, so we'll keep that one as is. I did have on the agenda approval of minutes. We just received the minutes today, so I'd prefer to take the opportunity to go through the minutes, and then we'll just approve those minutes at the next meeting in January as well. So, does anyone have any other further business?
Get the minutes, by the way.
Mr. Thrasher?
They look very good.
Names to please. And I will be sending a digital copy, of course.
Okay, and we can send that around as well. If any changes, just obviously let Christopher know, and we can make those changes and get them squared away to approve in January. Any other?
To adjourn.
Hold on, I didn't get to that yet, Sean.
Second, it's always,
Hold on.
it's always.
Any other business that anyone wants to discuss tonight? No.
Now
Do I-
motion to adjourn.
Do I have,
I'll second it.
do I have a motion to adjourn? Second, Maury?
Yes.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.